I think people still draw this analogy between selling a business and selling a property. Nobody sort of puts a for sale sign out the front of a business, has 50 people walk through on the weekend and, numerous ones saying, oh my God, I really love the kitchen and bathroom and the local schools are amazing, just offer an extra $100,000. What's going on at the moment in this current environment, and this has been going on since COVID, is that there is more money in the economy, there's more money on the sidelines, ready to buy businesses and invest than ever before in the history of man. We just want to help business owners succeed and cross that finish line well.
Welcome to the Dev Ready podcast. Joining me on the Dev Ready podcast today, I have Simon Bedard. Simon, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate the invite.
It's a pleasure to have you on and talk about business valuations and exit strategies and approaches. But before we do that, that's about as much as I know about you. So I'll let you explain to everyone else who doesn't know this is how I do it. I met Simon for the first time, and he'll tell us who he is and what he does.
Yeah, cool. Look, I'll try to make it quick. Spent the first half of my life in the investment world, fundamentally helping people build value and wealth in their lives, translated those kind of real value creation concepts into business. And I guess we started Exit Advisory Group on the back of the fact that we just saw a real need in the market. A lot of business owners know how to get into a company and they know how to grow a company. There wasn't a lot of advice and support around how to exit properly. Our business does literally two core things. We do mergers and acquisitions, mostly sell side. So in other words, helping business owners sell their companies when they're ready to exit. And we do that full end to end from, valuing the company, developing strategy, materials, finding buyers, negotiating, etc. And then we do a bunch of advisory work, which is really around helping people value their company, understand what it's worth, develop even just a rough plan around what do you need it to be worth, where do you want to go. And then, of course, if there's a gap between where you are now and where you want to be, then we can work with clients on how to grow value and build towards what might be the ideal exit.
Okay. So what made you take the leap and start the Exit Advisory Group on your own from your earlier career?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if I go back, as I said, I used to be in the investment world. I dealt with a lot of high net worth clients, people who were business owners who had, developed very successful businesses and saw how they ran companies and how they planned for exits and how strategic that thinking was. After I left the world of banking, I started a company, I bought one, I eventually built it up and sold it off myself. So I kind of went through that cycle. And then after a few more years back in corporate, my wife and I decided we wanted to buy a business and kind of go out on our own again. And at that point, I went shopping around for businesses. I spent about 18 months and I did deal with a lot of brokers and a lot of different people out there. And I guess I was just a little shocked by the lack of service and lack of professionalism that we saw. And, having been a business owner, having gone through that cycle myself, and I guess too, coming out of banking, you can appreciate the compliance that we have to go through to be allowed to talk to you about your money, right?
Yep.
And I saw these business owners who had worked their guts out all their lives, and here they are on the home stretch, wanting to cross the finish line, and the representation just wasn't as professional as it should be. And I guess I saw these business owners thinking, well, this is in many cases was their largest asset, often worth more than their home. Mm-hmm. And, they just weren't getting the support. I was struggling to even get people to return phone calls and emails to me, let alone provide good information about businesses. And I thought, this is just not how it's meant to be done. Like business owners, all the cliches about being the backbone of the economy and rah, rah, rah. But business owners do employ a lot of people. They work their asses off. They deserve to finish well. And, I guess that's where we just saw this gap in the market. And having been through it with our own money, time and effort, and, everyone jokes I used to have hair back then and then went through my own exit. So, we just saw the need, felt really passionate about it. And now we've been doing this for 8 years. We just want to help business owners succeed and cross that finish line well.
And I can imagine for those business owners, it's a very stressful time. Like you said, they've put in the hard yards and gotten 10, 20, 30, maybe 40 years of running a small business, depending on what it may be. And they're ready to go and they think everything's ready and they just need to find a buyer. I'm guessing a lot of cases, that's probably not how it goes.
100%, yeah. And I think people still draw this analogy between selling a business and selling a property. You know, nobody sort of puts a for sale sign out the front of a business, has 50 people walk through on the weekend and, you know, numerous ones saying, oh my God, I really love the kitchen and bathroom and the local schools are amazing. Just offer an extra 100 grand. Like, no, nobody does this, right? I think business owners, and this is one of the most probably important lessons I've realized over the years, is that business owners inherently are more comfortable with risk and uncertainty than the average person. They have to be.
Yep.
You know,
They're
if you don't
volatile.
have that, yeah, right. If you can't, if they don't haven't developed that muscle, you wouldn't be in business, because I think most people look over the cliff of going into business and they get too scared to jump, right? For various reasons. But that same quality that makes them great to be a business owner is the same thing that works against them when they go to sell, because they're on the inside looking out, thinking opportunity, entrepreneurial mindset, all this sort of good stuff, and they're comfortable with a certain level of risk that's going on in their business. Whereas investors coming and looking to buy their business are on the outside looking in, and they're fundamentally risk driven. You know, they're wondering, you know, what are the 6 different ways I could lose my money here? And so, you know, probably the best analogy, in fact, I can give you is the fear of flying, right? If you've got somebody who's terrified of flying, it doesn't matter what you say to them about the safety of flying, they're going to be scared of it, right? They have a perception about the risks of flying. Now, they're walking onto the plane next to the pilot. The funny thing is they are about to experience the same risk, exactly the same risk, but the perception between those two people of that risk is very, very different. So I'm sort of always encouraging the business owners, the pilots of their business, to understand the mindset of investors and understand where potential risks might sit in their business so they can learn how to mitigate those.
Do you think that also comes down to probably an attachment to the business, because the owner has built it, where the investor, they have no attachment? It's just it's a monetary figure that they're looking at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's and not in all cases, but yes, that is a thing. You know, one of my favourite sayings, you know, pick any issue in the world, we're all on a bell curve, right? You know, most people will kind of hover around the middle somewhere, and then you've got some extremes at each end. And I find it's the same when it comes to thinking about legacy with a business. You know, some business owners I speak to are just, it's actually legacy first. You know, I had a client who took the lowest of 3 offers because they felt that buyer respected their legacy more. And that was important. It was more important than the money. At the other end of the scale, I've had plenty of clients who don't care about legacy. They kind of go, look, you know, the business has been good to me. It's an asset. It's not me. It's not me personally. I've always had good relationships with my suppliers, customers, employees, etc. I've treated everyone fairly. I've done what I need to do. I don't owe that business anything, nor do I owe any of the people around it anything. You know, they've all profited from the relationships as have I. So, you know, it's an asset. I'm selling an asset, and you know, and that's the other extreme. And of course, everybody's in the middle, and you know, most people are in the middle, I should say, and will go up and down around those issues depending on how a transaction goes. And I guess one thing I will say is, nobody likes to be told they have an ugly child. And, you know, I've even had to pull buyers up at times and go, hey, like, be a little more respectful. You know, don't speak down to the business owner about stuff in their business. You're not walking in their shoes either. And just, you know, you can question things and raise concerns around risks without being insulting. So yes, it's an issue. It's one of those things we certainly like to talk to business owners about in advance, so they're thinking about it before they're in the stress of a deal.
Yeah. Do you find having the two sides of your business is it more difficult to sell the smaller business rather than doing like the mergers and acquisition side on the larger ones, just because it's an owner operator, is my assumption, on these smaller ones? They've been in there longer, where on the bigger side, it's probably treated more as a corporate entity where it's not a personal attachment. Because I run my own business, as I mentioned just before we started, and it is our business. We've been doing it. Like there is probably some attachment there, but I don't think there's a big one until it comes to sell. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer, like most things in life, is that it depends.
Yep.
I think when you look at smaller businesses, on one hand, it could be perceived to be a little bit easier just for the fact that there are more prospective buyers at the lower end, right? More people can afford to buy that business, therefore you might have more opportunities to sell it. But the real actual issue there is that at the smaller end, typically the buyers and sellers, in many cases, are less sophisticated. Their business, they understand less about how to go about all these sort of things. They're less resourced. So, often the business owner is having to be the guy who's doing, or the girl, I should say, although it still is heavily male dominated. But that business owner is the person who has to drive everything. So they're trying to run the business, they're trying to keep their numbers going and looking positive, and this could be a 9 to 12 month process of them now trying to do another process on the side where they're gathering information and answering questions, and, it's a second day job basically. And so that can be quite stressful for them. Whereas, when you start to go up in scale and as we touched on before, we sort of do transactions in that 2 to 3 million at the low end, up to about 100 million. We've got numerous transactions for sale at the moment at that 50 to 100 sort of level. When you get to that space, those companies have managed to grow through various ceilings and challenges, right? I think everybody who's listening to this who is in business, and let's say you've built a business to 2 million or 5 million or 10 million in revenue, they'll know that what got them to 2 million certainly didn't get them to 5 million, and that certainly wouldn't get them to 10 million. You've got to evolve and you've got to overcome various challenges and problems in a business. And in fact, some of the more kind of enlightened, emotionally intelligent leaders that I talk to will say, I had to fundamentally change, not my values as a person, but like as a leader, I had to evolve a lot to be able to keep driving the business forward. And so just the sheer fact of size means you have overcome various challenges, means that business is not only better resourced, they will have more people internally who can support you. They can afford to have better advisors and more advisors around them. The transaction process is going to be the same, but in terms of the stages, but even the buyers, they're far more wealthy, they're far more sophisticated, they've got a lot more advisors, they've probably done a lot of transactions in the past. So the ability to get a deal done with larger companies, might be a smaller pool of buyers, but the buyers are far more qualified to do that sort of work.
Yeah, they've gone through the paces before, and then they've got teams of people that can do the work as well. Exactly
right. And that's one of also the key messages here for business owners, Anthony, is that what's going on at the moment in this current environment, and this has been going on since COVID, is that there is more money in the economy. There's more money on the sidelines ready to buy businesses and invest than ever before in the history of man, right? Yep. We are literally going through the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. There is literally more capital around, and the investors have diversified and broadened and deepened. And so what's actually happening is that on the buy side is that there's a real competition for buying good quality businesses. And so in some ways that makes it more of a seller's market, which is good on one hand. But you get a whole bunch of other challenges that come out with that. I guess I would say to any business owner thinking of selling is that you're probably going to get numerous taps on the shoulder from buyers, whether it be a company, a private equity firm, like an actual company in their industry or related industry, a private equity firm, an individual private investor. There's all these people running around knocking on business owners' doors, virtually, and saying, hey, you want to sell? Hey, we're really nice people. Do you want to come and have a coffee? And they're all very, very friendly, which is, how you'd expect the salespeople to be. But to a business owner, if you're not an expert in mergers and acquisitions and business valuation and negotiation, them dealing with that one party on their own is a massive risk.
Yep.
Massive risk. Those big companies, like you said, have got teams of experts who do deals all day long. That's their bread and butter. You know, I liken it to, I don't know how old you are, Anthony, but you know, we're probably a reasonably similar vintage within a, you know, whatever gap. But you know,
Yep.
I'm almost 50, and I go, it's kind of like me going, oh, I'm going to take up the over 50s soccer, you know, just for a bit of fun on the weekends. And you turn up for your first game thinking, oh, I'm a bit out of shape, whatever. And you run onto the field and you see Manchester United on the other side. And you just go, hang on, what's going on here? And business owners don't realise that, because they go, oh, this is a bit friendly, and it's a bit of an ego stroke, right? Like everyone feels pretty pumped up when somebody goes, hey, we're interested in buying your company. It's like, oh, well, you know, good on me. I've done a good job here. But you know, really, a lot of that outreach is done by professional salespeople who've done this many, many times. And I'm not saying that they're bad or whatever. It's just that they're trying to run their own process. And they're trying to put a business owner through their process, which is designed to get them a better outcome.
Yeah.
So,
Of course.
you know, and that's business, that's life. Nobody begrudges that. But just like the old expression, right? You know, a lawyer who represents themselves has a fool for a client. Like, why on earth would you represent yourself in an arena that you have no experience in? So, you know, my message to every business owner is the tap on the shoulder is lovely. It's a good, lovely ego stroke. It'll make you feel good. But if you're seriously considering selling your business, then understand that it could take 12 months, that you should be running your own process where you've got your own advisors. You can invite in then a bunch of different prospective acquirers, get some competitive tension going, but have a little more control over how this process is going to go, so that, you know, you're trying to design a better outcome for yourself rather than being led down the garden path by a buyer.
Yeah, because it's going to come down to the end of the day what that number is that they're agreeing to buy, whether then that's going to include you staying on and being bought out over several years or on the spot or whatever it may be, or just the assets, or depending on what the situation is, and I'm guessing. And a lot of that's going to come down to those buyers not understanding the games or how these people are probably positioning certain numbers to make, all right, now your multiples drop because of this. This is too risky. You're the principal person, so you're leaving. We're going to now subtract X because of that, or whatever it may be. So you're not going to get the deal that you want. They're going to get the deal that they want. It's a negotiation.
Correct. And here's a bit of corporate M&A 101, right? Is after you've had the tap on the shoulder, and often it comes from somebody that you're kind of at least sort of aware of or know, or you may not be really close to them, but you may know of them. You know, they're very friendly. It's nice. It all feels good. You're having coffees. It's just everything's feeling lovely. And then most business owners kind of wake up or look up and they find themselves in a room 6, 9, even 12 months later, surrounded by accountants and lawyers and different people. They've been probed for every little scrap of information they could possibly hand over. They don't even necessarily have a written offer on the table about buying their business. And honestly, they just feel like they've been peeled layer by layer like an onion. And they're looking around. That first person who contacted them has been long gone. They're like, what is going on here? I have spent so much time on this process. I have no idea where it's even going. I have no idea if we're even getting a deal done. And usually at that point, that's when they, you know, and by the way, they've usually been spending the money mentally in their head for the last 6 months. So they're kind of going, I really want out now. I'm done. I want out. And that's kind of when they get lowballed and positioned and whatever else, you know? So once again, I mean, this, and I'm not suggesting every single corporate maliciously tries to manipulate people. Some do. You know, I had a corporate M&A guy laugh and go, "That's 101, mate. We see that stuff all the time." But what the reality is that corporates have their own process, and unless you've got a similar process and advisors to protect you and guide you and shield you from the fray, then you just get absorbed. And the likelihood that you'll end up accepting something that was suboptimal starts to go up.
Oh, definitely. And I think the biggest difference, if you look at that, if it is one of the larger groups and sort of corporate, and you're buying a own operator business or whatever it may be, is it's my business versus I work for that business.
Yes.
There's a big difference in that. And then they're solely based on KPIs and numbers. There's nothing else there.
Yeah. And it's a funny one, Anthony, that you raise that, because it's I've seen this before where people working in a large corporate, the guys we might be dealing with over a transaction, their job is to kind of get the deal done. Their job is not to manage the transition and the integration and make sure that the long-term value is captured. So they'll push. Hey, I got my bonus. Woohoo! And then even the buying company can sometimes fail to capture the value that they're buying because the deal was not considered from a long-term integration value perspective, rather than somebody who's just trying to hit a number, right? Whereas, if you or I were going out to buy a business, we're going, well, this is our money. This is our situation. This is my life. It impacts me in every way. Oh my goodness, I'm not looking at it as just get a quick win and tick some boxes and
you're trying to look at every single thing. How you're going to invest? How you're going to grow it? What opportunities do you have? Not just there's a deal across the line and handball it to the next person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw an article just this morning in the news talking about it. Actually, it came out from Bain. So, Bain they've got various podcasts and whatever, but they started a new one. And what they were saying is the Fortune 500 companies that still have their founders either at the helm or, part of the leadership team outperform all of the other Fortune 500 companies by a significant factor, right?
Yeah.
And I just think that's that nuanced care factor, right? That and we talk about it even with employees in I certainly know we talk about it, with employees and people in our team, is how do you get that level of passion and that discretionary effort put into things that, people don't just go, oh, well, I don't really care. I'm doing my job and I'll clock off at this time. It's, no, I actually care about the outcome. And, that means sometimes you work a bit harder or you do that little extra effort and do what's required, right? It's all about the outcome.
Yeah. I think it comes down to that word you said there is care.
Yeah.
They're going to care more about what they're doing, just like the business owner, the smaller business will, because it's theirs.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah. And I think that's sort of one of the things that certainly one of the messages that I give to my clients is that we're a team of business owners for business owners, right? Like all the advisors in our team have run companies, run their own businesses. Like we've all walked in those shoes and done it. So, we see ourselves as business owners. That's business owners are our people.
Yeah. And that's what you need when you're going through any sort of consulting process. The person who's advising you to have gone through the process before. 100%. Otherwise, they're just doing like a third-party armchair view on things. Like when you get these big consulting firms, they send in graduates to then advise these massive companies. Like, what experience have you had? You've read textbooks.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it as well, like I had a client once in the renewable energy sector and he was tossing up working with us and eventually he chose to go with one of the big four. We won't mention names, but and he actually over a coffee one morning, he said to me, what do you think about X company? And I said, well, they're X company. Everybody knows who they are. Everyone knows what they're about. Everyone understands the large corporate advisory landscape. I said, but if you're asking me, would they be a good fit for you? I don't think so. You're too small for them. And he actually got offended by that. His business was turning over about 25 million at the time. Yeah. I'm like, dude, you're way too small. I'm sorry. Like it's not a criticism of them, but their model is built for bigger companies. And what you're going to need is somebody who can get their hands dirty and knows how to get out there and hustle and shake the tree and kind of do the groundwork that larger companies are not built for. Larger companies are great. They can lift the phone and call another large corporate because their brand opens the door. But when it comes to hustling and finding other small companies and engaging in, I always find with our team, like we'll knock on the front door, but sometimes you've got to go around and tap on the side window to get into an opportunity, right? And so anyway, long story short was that he went through a process and he eventually came back to me and said, look, you were right. They sent out a few emails to a list that I provided and that was kind of it. And it cost me 150 grand. It's like, okay, well, hate to say I told you so, but it's sometimes you just got to learn the hard way.
And that's him also not understanding probably the process and the size of the business and their operations, and then probably thinking that he's suitable for them because there's too much an attachment to the business, and that ego probably came in.
You just said it, ego. It's ego, and the fact that he got offended because I said he was too small, and I was like, I'm not trying to offend you. I'm just giving you genuine advice here. And to be frank, most of the people in the Big Four would have said the same thing. Like, why are we doing this deal? This is too small. It's not got the scale we need.
Yeah, and it's small for that end of town, and it may be large for another one. You just have to find the right person that's going to could take your interest into consideration and help you.
100%. Horses for courses, right? And it's the same reason we don't really represent companies that are kind of sub 2 million, because our process is too heavy for smaller companies, meaning that the fee structure won't make sense. It's one of the guys in my team says it's kind of like trying to open a nut with a sledgehammer. It's just overkill.
Yeah, it'll work, but it's not going to get you the result you want.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, you might crush the nut at the same time. So,
just before we wrap up, we've got a few more minutes, but what are some of the key things that someone needs to do when they're thinking about selling? Because waking up one day and saying, I've had enough and I'm ready to sell, that's probably the spark, but that's not going to get you anywhere close to what you need to do. From my understanding, it's going to be the key person risk is probably be the biggest thing you need to think about, especially from any small business, if it's the founders are still there. But then how does that lead on?
Yeah, so look, a couple of quick frame things. The first, just a quick reminder, like if you get tapped on the shoulder and you're thinking about selling, don't assume that this is going to be nice and simple and easy and, hey, that's convenient. I'll take the convenient path. The convenient path usually leads to pain and suffering. Seriously. Mm-hmm. So if you're ever going to think about that, as a business owner, anyone listening to this, if you're going to sell your business, it's a little bit like going mountain climbing, right? If you want to be the person who climbs Everest, you don't get to base camp, which is where most business owners are sitting when they get the tap on the shoulder, right? You don't get to base camp and sit around and come out of your tent one day and go, oh, it's a sunny day, the wind is a little bit low. I think today's the day. I'll just slap on a pair of thongs and grab a bottle of water and off we go, Like nobody does that because it's silly, it's dangerous. If you want to climb to the peak, you're going to need a climb team around you, experts who know what they're doing, who have walked that path many, many times. They've got plan A, B, and C. So if plan A doesn't work, they will change direction. They will mix it up to protect you and stop you, protect you from the risks. And by the way, sometimes you start a process even and you should stop and go back to base camp because halfway through the process, something in the world changes. God forbid another global pandemic, but stuff changes, right? Yeah. So you need to have a solid, experienced team and recognize that selling is a challenging and complex process that takes time and you need the right support. So number one, that should be one of the big takeaways. Two, and give yourself time. I had a person just yesterday, it's interesting, they said, look, I don't think I probably need to get started for a while and, I don't want to get out for maybe another 3 years. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. Like, there's no pressure from my end. My business, by the way, is built on the premise, we all exit one day, whether we like it or not. So, I don't need to sell you on this idea. Like, at some point, people need help exiting. So, it's when the owners are ready to do this that they should act. But where they always miss is how much time it can take. And to that person I spoke to yesterday, I said to them, if with your business, if you sold today, the business owner, the buyer would probably want you to hang around for a minimum of a year, but probably 2 years. Now, if it's also going to take up to 12 months to do the transaction, if you want to stop working in 3 years, you probably need to start now.
Yep.
Like that's the bottom line. The difference might be, and this was another conversation I just had yesterday, was if you know you're going to work for another 3 years and that's when you really want to stop, you can either start selling now and then work for someone else for 2 years, or we can work really hard for the next year to 2 years to get you out of the day-to-day running of the business, build some more process, systems, de-risk, and you touched on a couple of those things which I'll expand on, but get the business really fit and ready for sale so that when we go and do the transaction for the 12 months, there's a good chance you won't have to hang around for very long for a transition. So I'll speak for myself here as a business owner. I'd much rather work for myself than someone else. So, thinking about that journey, and this is why I say to people, if you know you're going to get out one day, and we all are, giving yourself 3 to 5 years even as just to start planning and getting a little bit more match fit is a really good idea. So that's the second point. The third point is, and the final point is, watch for the key challenges and risks. And I'm going to rattle off a couple of quick ones here, but you picked up one, key man risk, right? If the business is too focused on you as the owner, it's going to hurt you in value and it's going to hurt you in the terms of the deal, meaning you've got to stick around a much longer time, and you might have an earn-out, meaning you might not get paid all your money. So key man risk, and key man risk goes beyond the owner, it can be employees as well. The second thing is concentration risk. And I see concentration risk in suppliers, customers, employees is almost a little bit of a concentration risk itself, but classify that as key man risk. But if you're overly dependent on a supplier or overly dependent on a customer, that's going to hurt you. And I'll give a little scale here so people understand what I'm trying to say. If your largest customer contributes less than 10% of your revenue, you're cool. That's fine. If you can get it below 5%, even better. But once it gets to about 15%, people start going, oh, there's a little bit of risk there. By the time it hits 20, 25%, there's starting to be a red flag and a bit of a waving and hey, this is starting to become a real problem. Mate, once you get to 50%, there's alarm bells going off. People are really nervous about the risk around that customer. So, anybody listening to this, think about your largest customers, think about your top 5 or 10 customers even. What does that look like and are you overly concentrated? On the supply side, if you've got one supplier, and I had a client like this, if you have one supplier that contributes, more than 50% of your revenue through their products and whatever, that's also a problem, right? I had one customer who was 82% of their revenue came from one supplier. And in the end, it hurt their deal. It reduced the value. We had 3 offers on the table, and he had to take the offer from the supplier, which was $9 million lower than the other offers we had. 9 mil left on the table because he hadn't fixed that problem. Now, okay, he was still happy. He still ended up getting a good deal, life-changing money. But at the end of the day, that's still you kind of look back and go, man, we could have done something about that. So, so thinking about those kind of risks is it's the sort of stuff that takes time to fix. So, if you leave it to the last minute, probably going to have to just deal with it and take a hit in value.
Yeah, or just keep extending your time frame.
Well, that's right. And
if you can.
Well, that's part of this sort of dichotomy that people find themselves in, is that value and time are flip sides of the same coin. If somebody says to me, I want $10 million to get out of my business to sell, and I go, well, we think it's worth 5. That business owner now has a decision to make, and it's a tough decision. Do I want the money more or do I want the time more? As in, do I want to get out really quick, in which case I'm going to have to take a lower number? Or am I willing to hang around longer, in which case I've got time now to grow value? Time or money? What's more important to you? So
normally it's the triangle. You've just got 2.
Yeah. Oh, look, there's so many other variables and layers and stuff like that. But time and money are the two biggest things that hit business owners. And once again, I just find that people leave it way too long to even ask themselves that question. And so, and sometimes, by the way, people come to me with health issues, or somebody in their families had a health issue, and all of a sudden they don't have time anymore. Time is gone as an asset. So,
you wake up one day and it's already too late, and then you think, all right, I'm done. That's it, and then you've got no time left to fix it. So,
100%,
it does make sense.
Yeah.
Well, Simon, it's been a great chat. A lot of there to take in for anyone listening, and even if you're just starting your business, it's always good to have a plan in place to exit, I think, from the start, because then you do have the time to make the changes and course correct.
100%.
If anyone wants to find out more and reach out, how can they do that?
Look, the best way would be just hit us up on the website. So go to exitadvisory.com.au. If you'd like to hearing more stories about business owners who've been through transactions, you can certainly check out our podcast, which is the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast. We're going to tick over our 100th episode in the new year, and there's lots of stories there from people who've just been through it. So, if you're thinking about this sort of stuff, that's probably a good place to start.
And we'll add all that to the show notes. Once again, thanks for joining me on the Dev Ready podcast, Simon.
Thanks for having me.